Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim. Our top story on Impact today: massive damage in the north of Indonesia's Lombok Island after a powerful earthquake, the second to hit the area in a week. The Indonesian president has called for an immediate evacuation of all casualties as thousands of residents and tourists try to get out any way they can. At least 98 people are known to have died.
The evacuation of the injured and the dead should be done as well as possible.
North Korea calls on the US to drop sanctions, saying it's already shown goodwill and has kept its side of the bargain between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And we'll get the latest from the US on Donald Trump's son's meeting with a Russian lobbyist. All that and more coming up here on Impact. Thousands of residents and tourists are being evacuated from a holiday island in Indonesia, which has been struck by an earthquake for the second time in a week. The quake, which was magnitude 6.9 and shallow, hit Lombok on Sunday. At least 98 people are known to have been killed, and the authorities say they expect that figure to rise. Hundreds more were injured. The country is prone to earthquakes because it sits on the Ring of Fire, an arc of volcanoes and fault lines in the Pacific Basin. Lombok is east of Bali. The two islands are home to about 7 million people, but millions more visit every year. The quake has also affected the Gili Islands, three tiny islands just off the coast of Lombok, which are popular with divers. This report from Jane Francis Kelly.
Chaotic scenes greeted people waiting to be rescued on the beaches. Thousands were on the move trying to get to safety, but the authorities struggled to meet demand.
Most victims were killed by collapsed buildings, evacuations being done step by step due to a shortage of vessels.
Tourist Mike Bennett is still stuck on one of the Gili Islands, which is close to Lombok, and felt the effects of the earthquake.
There was a huge evacuation this morning, and then we heard that the authorities had actually stopped the evacuations from taking place because there was so much hassle and destruction and chaos in Lombok. So the boat stopped. We're here with maybe about 100 people. It's getting dark now. There's no power. There's no water. We're gonna hold out and just see what happens tomorrow.
Those who managed to get to Lombok tried to get flights, but it was far from easy.
It's terrible that what happened in the Gili. But I don't know how to go to the airport.
Despite the devastation, Lombok Airport is continuing to operate, allowing tourists to cut short their holidays and leave. One Dutch man who injured his knee was in a restaurant when he felt the effects of the powerful earthquake.
The noise was crazy, so I thought, okay, this is bad, this is an earthquake. So I started running to the exit, but then everybody who was in the restaurant was also running through the exit. So it was like a big stampede and everyone fell, and there were like 3 or 4 people who fell on top of me.
The earthquake, with a magnitude of 6.9, happened early on Sunday evening, the second in a week to hit Lombok. Indonesia is prone to them due to its location on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of volcanoes and fault lines. Those hurt were taken to damaged hospitals and makeshift clinics as medical staff try to cope with the sudden influx. Indonesia's president has called for the immediate evacuation of the injured.
I've said work should be carried out as fast as possible to bring out the dead and injured, as well as to provide emergency aid and put on more flights to collect people stuck in more remote areas.
The country's disaster management agency said military and aid teams were delivering tents and medical aid, but the earthquake had damaged roads and bridges, making it difficult to move around. It's expected the numbers of confirmed dead will rise in the coming days. Jane Francis Kelly, BBC News.
Okay, let's get the latest from Thomas Howes, who is Director of Programme Implementation for Save the Children in Jakarta. Thomas, thanks very much for joining us here on the programme. Just let us know what your teams are saying on the ground in Lombok.
Yeah, thank you. We have a team on the ground in northern Lombok, which is, I think, where the impact has been most severe. And what my team is saying is that, you know, when they look around, when they do the drive from North Lombok to Mataram, they are seeing that 8 out of 10 houses are severely damaged. So what we're seeing is a large amount of structural damage, and we're also seeing a lot of people who have obviously left their homes. They're in sort of makeshift camps close to their homes, and also organized camps that have been put on by the government. So overall, the situation is not good. These people are in urgent need of support, and obviously, with us being Save the Children, you know, our focus is on children. We're concerned about children being potentially separated from their parents, and also just in terms of, you know, this is a very difficult thing to deal with for adults. So, you know, children are going to be particularly distressed at this time.
Indeed. I mean, you've talked about the fact that children will be particularly distressed, and post-earthquake, you know, we saw a lot of children separated in places like Nepal from their parents. I mean, what is Save the Children doing to ensure that children aren't separated in any way?
Yeah, so it's very early days since the earthquake, so it's only 24 hours in, and obviously we don't have all the information yet. But what we do know at this moment is that the majority of reports are saying that even if children have been separated from their parents, they are with extended family members, which is good. Now, what needs to happen in the next few days is these camps and these shelters need to be organized, and there needs to be sort of safe areas to play, so that the children can be supervised, can sort of try to return to a sense of normalcy as quickly as possible.
And of course, aside from trying to deal with a lack of shelter, they also are desperate for food, water and sanitation.
That's correct. So in terms of food and water, the Indonesian government response has been generally fairly swift. There are obviously gaps, as there would be in any country, and we're here to support the Indonesian government as best we can. So we have a bunch of stock, things like, you know, shelter items, tarpaulins, things to, you know, jerry cans to carry water, and mosquito nets to prevent the spread of, you know, dengue and difficult and diseases like that. Those items are on their way and will be shortly landing in Lombok and will be distributed to the affected population.
Thomas House from Save the Children, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Now, I've been speaking to Indonesia's ambassador to the UK. I asked him if he thought his country could cope with such a disaster, as the region has been prone to earthquakes in the past.
After the Aceh earthquake, you know, which took place in 2004, and then also in the Yogyakarta earthquake, if you remember, in 2005, and then another one, a big one in West Sumatra, 2009. But, you know, since that devastating, you know, earthquake, which followed tsunami at 2004, the government, you know, has taken really, you know, dramatic steps in order to strengthen and also improve the capacity to respond, you know, to undertake rescue operations, and also for the post-disaster constructions. So over the last, you know, 10 to 15 years, I think a system already been in place. Now we are quite aware of that fact that Indonesia is, you know, quite, you know, disaster-prone. And we are on the ring of fire, so I think all that, you know, preparations, you know, should be strengthened also in the future.
And yet we've seen something like 13,000 buildings collapse. So are the Indonesian authorities paying attention to the fact that, you know, they need to build earthquake-prone homes?
Yes, they do. But you know, we also have to take, you know, into account the fact that the magnitudes, you know, of the earthquake is quite, you know, big, around 6.9. And that's, you know, I think is really, you know, powerful, you know, earthquake. But of course, you know, still different from what happened in Aceh in 2004, which reached almost like 9 Richter scale. You know, that is the biggest that we had so far. And in fact, the housing ministry since 2005, you know, especially after the Yogyakarta earthquake, begin to, you know, to draw plan, you know, in order to also support and help the local communities, you know, in order to strengthen, you know, and also change, you know, in some part of the country, the building structures, you know, for homes and also for buildings, you know, around the country.
Indonesian Ambassador Rikal Sukma there. Now, North Korea has called on the United States to drop its sanctions, saying Pyongyang has made a number of goodwill gestures following the June summit between its leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump. State media said North Korea had handed over the remains of U.S. troops killed in the Korean War and dismantled a nuclear test site. It said the American demand for total denuclearization before sanctions can be eased is outrageous. Our correspondent Laura Bicker is in Seoul for us.
The state-run newspaper in North Korea describes Washington's tactics as dirty and disgraceful. They seem angry that the United States wants to continue its sanctions process. This is this maximum pressure policy to try to get North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. They say this Pyongyang editorial seems to be saying that they are doing all the work in North Korea and getting nothing in return. They point to several things. They say that they have given back the US prisoners, the 3 US prisoners. They say they've given back the remains of US prisoners of war killed during the Korean War. And they say that they have destroyed a nuclear test site and they are in the process of dismantling a site up in the northwest of the country that's a missile test stand. They believe that they're doing all the work, and in return the US is giving nothing back. The US is saying, well, hang on a second, we want these sanctions kept in place so that denuclearization can happen. They believe that this is the way to push the North Koreans into giving up its weapons. That's something that the North Koreans describe in this editorial as an outrageous claim.
That's our Seoul correspondent Laura Bicker there. Now let's go to the United States. President Trump has admitted that his son met a Russian lawyer in June 2016 to, quote, get information on an opponent. But Mr. Trump argues it was legal. It is the U.S. president's most direct statement so far on the reason for Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with Kremlin-linked lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya in June 2016. Well, the question is what bearing, if any, this will have on the Mueller investigation into Russia's alleged role in helping Mr. Trump win the 2016 election. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue is in Washington for us. Gary, this is the president's first major admission that Donald Trump Jr. met with this Russian lawyer, and he continues, though, to describe the Mueller investigation as a witch hunt.
He does continue to describe the investigation as a witch hunt, and things, in a sense, are hotting up significantly, and they've been interviewing more and more people, and the president's been getting more and more irate about it. He has defended the nature of this meeting in the past. Initially, of course, when the news of it first broke, the Trumps, including Donald Trump Jr., described it, told the New York Times it was just about adoption policy. They then had to revise all that when the information came out that they were being offered information, and the president has been a little confused, I think someone would say, about some of the justification. But this is him justifying taking that meeting, or his son taking that meeting with his advisors, still asserting that he didn't know anything about it and saying this is what everyone does and it's totally legal. I think there are some in the States, in the legal community, that would dispute whether that was true, in the sense that you're not allowed to take any kind of benefit from a foreign power or a foreign agent in terms of elections here. And that doesn't just mean money, that can be other things too. And even discussing it or planning to do it or thinking about it could potentially be caught up in some sort of criminal investigation as well.
What's been the reaction to this tweet in Washington?
Well, I think, a certain weariness. People are obviously parsing it as much as they can. As I say, this isn't actually the first time he's defended the nature of the meeting and the reason for it. But, of course, it is in this context, this new context, really, of the first trial taking place, for example. His former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is on trial, not related to claims of collusion, but as part of a sort of spin-off investigation from the Muellers, the Robert Mueller inquiry. And, of course, we're getting nearer and nearer to the midterm elections, so the political stakes are rising all the time. And the president's temper seems to be rising significantly the longer this thing goes on.
Gary, thanks so much for that update from Washington. Now to other stories making headlines here on Impact. The chief executive of Afghanistan, Abdullah Abdullah, has confirmed that senior US officials had direct contact with members of the Afghan Taliban in talks held in Qatar last week. Mr. Abdullah said the discussions were aimed at paving the way for a peace deal in Afghanistan. The United States looks set to roll out new sanctions against Iran. The Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said an announcement will be made on Monday. President Trump pulled the US out of a deal between world powers and Tehran in May. That agreement had enabled the lifting of international sanctions in return for curbs on Iran's nuclear program. And the world's most Michelin-starred chef, Joel Robuchon, has died age 73. The French master chef, named Chef of the Century, owned restaurants across 3 continents, held more than 30 Michelin stars and mentored chefs including Gordon Ramsay. Robuchon is reported to have passed away in Geneva surrounded by family following a battle with cancer. Do stay with us here on Impact. Still to come. Freedom and fresh air for 4 captive Japanese brown bears after they find a better life here in England. Hello again, this is Impact on BBC World News. We're starving and need food and water. That was the message New Mexico police received, which led to the discovery of 11 malnourished children in a makeshift compound. The children, aged between 1 and 15, were being kept in squalid conditions. 5 adults were also found at the scene, including 2 heavily armed men. Earlier, I was joined by CBS correspondent Laura Podesta in New York. She gave us this update.
The 11 children, Yelda, have been removed from the compound. They are now in the custody of New Mexico's Children, Youth and Families Department. Now, New Mexico law enforcement officials found these children while they were looking for a 3-year-old boy who was allegedly abducted by his father. That man was found in the compound, but his 3-year-old son was not. And that's when they discovered those 11 other children ranging in age from 1 to 15 years old. They essentially had no clothing, according to investigators, no shoes, no running water, no electricity, and very minimal food, just some potatoes and a box of rice. And pictures that were released from the compound show it is a filthy place surrounded by tires and barricaded by walls.
As you say, incredibly disturbing. At the site, they also found 3 women alongside with that armed man and also another man.
Correct. And of those 3 women, one of them was pregnant. The local sheriff says there is reason to believe that those 3 women are the mothers of the 11 children. Now, the 2 men who were also living on the compound were taken into custody. They're both charged with crimes. One of them was charged for child abduction, and the other man was charged for harboring a fugitive. We're told the 3 women were also taken into custody, but then they were released to CYFD, and we're told they were not being cooperative with the investigation.
Do we know where the children are now?
They're in the custody of the Children, Youth and Families Department in New Mexico, so they are safe. They're separated from those 2 men. Those 3 women, again, they are also with CYFD, so perhaps they are able to communicate with their children.
Laura Podesta from CBS News there. Now, the U.S. Senator Rand Paul, who's visiting Moscow, says he's invited Russian senators to Washington for talks. Mr. Paul's trip to Moscow is the 2nd U.S. political delegation to visit Russia in the space of a month. It follows President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki a few weeks ago. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg has more.
Well, this is the Federation Council, the upper house of the Russian parliament. Now, Russian senators should be on their summer holidays right now, but a small group of senators has been called back because of what's happening in that room behind me. And that's because a US delegation is here, led by the American Senator Rand Paul, meeting a group of senior Russian senators about how to boost relations between Russia and America. And amongst the Russians is Sergei Kislyak. Remember him, he used to be the Russian ambassador to Washington back in 2016 when Moscow allegedly interfered in the American presidential election. Now, this is a controversial visit because just 4 days ago, America's most senior intelligence and security chiefs announced that Russia was continuing efforts to try to undermine American democracy. They agreed to keep on talking.
We have agreed and we have invited members of the Foreign Relations Committee of Russia to come to the United States to meet with us in Washington. We've also agreed, if it can be arranged, to meet as well in a neutral country with all of our committees. So I think this is incredibly important, and those who believe in either country that we should not have diplomacy are greatly mistaken.
And after his few brief comments, the American senator made a rather hasty exit. Senator, BBC News.
I didn't hear you.
BBC News, 4 days ago, your country's top security officials and intelligence officials said that Russia continued to meddle in the election. Was it right for you to be here? How confused are you by some of the messages coming out of Washington? Because
I'm not confused. I am watching the political scene in the United States for quite a long period of time to understand that the infights in the United States are maybe predominant factor now defining the quality of relations with us, because it kind of became a hostage of the political fights in the United States.
Well, it sounds as if all the talk around this table today was of cooperation. But look at what's happening back in America. Recently, a bipartisan group of senators called for tough new sanctions against Russia. And you have the ongoing investigation by Robert Mueller into alleged collusion with Russia by the Trump campaign. It's hard to see how that cooperation is going to build. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Okay, let's go to China now, and a number of truck drivers have been rescued from their vehicles after being caught in flash floods. More than 20 trucks were caught in floodwaters in Henan provinces after heavy rains. Some of the drivers climbed on top of their cabins as their trucks were dragged downstream. Emergency workers used ropes and harnesses to rescue the stranded occupants. There were no reports of injuries. Now, 4 captive Japanese brown bears have travelled over 8,000 kilometres from Japan to their new home here in the UK. The bears, known as Riku, Kai, Amu and Hanako, have just arrived. It's a huge move for the bears, who spent their life in confined conditions in a museum in Japan. Now they'll have a newly built 2.5-acre reserve all to themselves in northern England, as Fiona Landon reports.
For the last 3 decades, this has been home to Hanako, a brown bear living in a museum in northern Japan. Her cage so small she's only ever been able to take 2 steps. But 4 days ago, that all changed. First, the oldest male, Amu, is sedated by vets. And despite prods from Hanako, his next-door neighbour, he remains asleep, while all 350 kilos of him is stretchered out to a truck.
We started at 4 o'clock this morning, and it's now 9 o'clock, and all 4 bears are in the crates and just being strapped into the lorry.
And here begins their 5,000-mile journey. The main concern, keeping 4 bears cool in 43-degree heat. It's a well-planned operation. Fans at the ready to spray the bears, sheets of ice and buckets of watermelon. 2 flights later, 4 bears arrive at Heathrow.
And I was sitting on the plane thinking no one in this flight knows there's 4 brown bears sitting underneath us. It was quite surreal.
Okay, I'm just opening the gate now.
And these, the very first tentative steps into their new home in Yorkshire.
They could do very little. It was a concrete floor.
It all started 2 years ago when this animal welfare expert saw the bears in Japan.
If a bear could express happiness, that would be it. Bears, again, they can spend up to 18 hours a day foraging, so he's never been able to do that. They have really powerful front claws, and for the first time just now, he was able to use those claws and dig.
Well, Kai is 17, and this is the first time in his entire life he's ever been able to take a bath. Getting out, well, that proved a little more problematic. But this is his new permanent home, so he's got a lifetime to master it. Fiona Landon, BBC News.
Now, before we go, just a reminder of our top story. Thousands of residents and tourists are being evacuated from a holiday island in Indonesia, which has been struck by an earthquake for the second time in a week. The quake, which was magnitude 6.9 and shallow, hit Lombok on Sunday. More than 90 people are known to have been killed. We'll have lots more on that story coming up in Global in 30 minutes' time. I'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye for now.